Okay, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the complex characters who make up the history of the Renaissance papacy. We're going to begin with Pius II. Pius II came from a noble family who were in straitened circumstances. This is a trend that's pretty characteristic of the Renaissance. We discussed this in the material on Renaissance society. The wealthy nobles who had dominated society during the medieval period are struggling economically as we enter into the 15th century. Also note that Pius II, his birth name was Aeneas. Why is this significant? Aeneas is the name of the survivor from the Trojan War who, according to Roman mythology, traveled from Troy, fled from Troy, and founded the city of Rome. So this is again indicative of the Renaissance society at this time that's looking to the ancient world for its inspiration. Pius II, Aeneas at the time, had a prominent career as a humanist, as a Renaissance intellectual. He wrote some pretty raunchy poetry. He lived a pretty hedonistic lifestyle. He had a number of children out of wedlock. He protested Eugenius IV when there was the conflict between Eugenius and the conciliarists, but he also displays an ability to switch sides pretty seamlessly and to go to work for anyone. And so he is able to persuade the cardinals to elect him pope in 1458. However, from this point onwards, we see that he takes his spiritual duties seriously. He achieves peace in Italy between the different warring city-states. He tries to launch a crusade. He makes Rome a center of Renaissance art. And so we see the complexity of these characters who become pope at this time. This is someone who comes from a totally is too strong a word, but a highly irreligious background. And then presents themselves now as someone or who acts in a way once they become pope as someone who is highly religious. So that's kind of what's to me is very interesting about these characters in history. The next pope that we're going to look at is Sixtus IV, who becomes pope in 1471. And Sixtus IV is very successful in continuing to restore Rome and to continue to expand the papacy's influence in Rome. He restores churches, including the Sistine Chapel, the papacy's private chapel. He restores Roman infrastructure. People point especially to the Ponte Sisto, this bridge over the river Tiber. You can see how the Tiber here is central part, this river is a central part of the city of Rome. This is the first bridge that's been built, first new bridge that's been built over the Tiber. Obviously, that's a massive point of infrastructure. And this is the first the first new bridge that's been built in Rome since the time of the ancient Roman Empire. And so when you look at the city of Rome today, when you look at the Vatican today, many of these roads and bridges were constructed by Sixtus IV. He also supports the development of the Capitoline museums. This is sort of an image of Sixtus IV opening the Capitoline museums, the museums on the Capitoline Hill. These are museums that played a vital role in preserving the treasures of the ancient Roman Empire, preserving the memories of the ancient Roman Empire for those who wish to study them. Nevertheless, there is a dark side to these Renaissance popes that's very real, that we see in Sixtus IV. So Sixtus IV promoted his nephews to become cardinals, to hold very influential administrative positions in the Catholic Church. This is a sign of weakness in the papacy. It's a sign because it's a display of corruption, but it also shows that the Pope is relying on family ties rather than spiritual ties. He doesn't trust that everyone that calls themselves a Christian, that calls themselves a Catholic, is going to be loyal to the papacy and loyal to him. He only trusts those who have a biological relationship with him, those who have something financial to gain from this. So this shows the weakness of the papacy's spiritual authority. Sixtus is also infamous for launching what are known as the Papacy plots. These were attacks on the Medici, Lorenzo de' Medici, Lorenzo the Magnificent, who we talked about a few lectures back, and his brother. So Florence is also in the center of Italy. It's the nearest big city to the papacy. Florence and the papacy had become rivals, and Sixtus IV arranges an attempted assassination of Lorenzo and his brother at Mass in the church on Easter Sunday. So this is one of the holiest days, holiest events of the Christian year, and you have a pope exploiting this to try and kill a political rival. And so Lorenzo escapes the assassination attempt. His brother is killed. There's a riot in Florence, and a bishop is killed by the mob. This is a sign of the way in which the papacy's efforts to re-establish its independence, to establish its authority, can be taken to the point of turning the papacy into basically a purely political figure. There's nothing religious that's motivating what Sixtus is doing here. He's simply trying to secure papal political power. Now, he may be trying to secure papal political power in order to pursue religious interests, but it shows how these religious interests have been subordinated to the political interests of the papacy, and the political agenda of the papacy is undermining their spiritual leadership. And we're going to see this when we move on to the second half of the history of the Renaissance papacy, and in particular we move on to Alexander VI. Alexander VI is one of the most infamous popes in history. Sixtus IV, succeeded by one of his relatives. His family had become extremely powerful as a result of all the nepotism, and so the cardinals choose someone who they consider a relative outsider to become pope in 1492. Choose this man who takes the name of Alexander VI. He is a Spaniard, so he's an outsider in that sense. He had received absentee positions in the church from his uncle from the time that he was a teenager. So from the time that he was 14, he held positions in the church, but they were what is known as absentee positions. So you were appointed the bishop of a certain diocese, the abbot of a certain abbey, but you never visited these dioceses or these abbeys. You simply collected the revenues. So this had become a common abuse in the Catholic Church at this time. Alexander VI helps Pius II to become pope, and he receives kickbacks as a result of this. He is made the abbot of another couple of abbeys and the bishop of another couple of sees as a way of bringing that revenue in. He's also, as you can imagine, for someone who has this kind of wealth without a whole lot of responsibility at such an early age, he's living a relatively unrestrained lifestyle. And so we have actually an instance, even of Pius II, someone who was no stranger to a more worldly lifestyle for a pope, reproving the man who had become Alexander VI for carrying out a party that had turned into an orgy. Alexander denies that it's an orgy and it's just kind of a crazy party, and he's forgiven. But there are other aspects of Alexander's life that confirm that he's living a disreputable lifestyle at this time. At the age of 58, he has a relationship with a woman who is a teenager. He has 3 children, 3 sons out of wedlock. One of these sons, at the age of 7, has another of these absentee positions in the church, where he's receiving revenue from holding a church office that he doesn't observe. As a 7-year-old, where is that revenue going? It's going to his father. Alexander VI, interestingly enough, also has the Black Death, but recovers. So this is his background when he becomes Pope in 1492. Now, some people have started to argue that Alexander VI is actually a victim of efforts to blacken his reputation by Italians who despised him for being a Spaniard. So I'm going to present you sort of the other side of the coin here. The Romans, who were not shy about complaining and rioting against popes, did not object to Alexander VI. They saw him as a competent administrator. They saw him as a generous governor of the city. He defended Rome against an invasion from France. At the same time, he's also relying on his family to defend church lands. That means he's following pretty corrupt, nepotistic practices of giving his children prominent positions, prominent church positions, prominent political positions. He's making them generals, he's giving them armies. They're behaving in ways that are pretty crazy. Go look at the Borgia family. You find all kinds of accusations of rape and murder and affairs that are going on. And these are the children of the Pope, and everyone knows that they're the children of the Pope. At the same time, Alexander VI began to reform church morals. We're told that after one of his sons was found dead, he swore to reform the church, and he began to take steps to eliminate some of the abuses he had taken advantage of. So he starts to make it more difficult for members of the church to hold these absentee positions and to bring in money in those ways. So this is the complexity of Alexander VI. Someone who lived, I don't think anyone would call it a holy lifestyle. Most people would call it an unholy lifestyle, who nevertheless was popular among the ordinary people of the time, who reformed some of the abuses in the church that he had taken advantage of. Alexander VI is succeeded by the nephew of Sixtus IV. So Sixtus IV's family is the other very powerful family around the papacy at this time. And this is Pope Julius II. When you become Pope, you take a new name. Julius II takes the name of Julius, not in honor of the first Pope Julius, but in honor of Julius Caesar. And this tells you a little bit about Julius II. Julius II was much more concerned with being a warrior and a great soldier and a great general than he was with being Pope. He defeated the son of Alexander VI, Cesare Borgia, who had his own army, was trying to carve out a kingdom for himself in central Italy. At the same time, he supports important works of art by Raphael and Michelangelo that we'll talk about in more detail later on, this including the spectacular Sistine Chapel and the artwork in the Sistine Chapel that's painted by Michelangelo during his pontificate. He established the Swiss Guard to defend the papacy. This is a part of the Julius's effort to make himself a great general and a famous general and to have a famous military legacy. He restores the papal states, the territories of the papacy, partly because he wants to be a great general, partly because it's seen as important that the papacy has this protection from powerful kings like the French kings who might want to control the papacy. Again, like Alexander, there's some complexity here. He condemns simony, that's the act or the abuse of gaining a church position by paying money for it, yet this is widely known. This is how he became Pope. He paid a bribe, he bribed those who were electing the Pope. So there's definitely a recognition that these acts are acts of abuse and spiritual corruption. But there's also an unwillingness and a fragility and an unwillingness to get away from these acts. The last Renaissance Pope was Leo X. Leo X was a nephew of Lorenzo de' Medici. So here's where we see these two spheres of influence colliding. The Medici had tried to make themselves more and more influential throughout Italy. Now they finally managed to make one of their relatives a member of the papacy. Leo X, another great contributor, great patron of literature, art, and history, and education in Rome at the time, but considered someone who was more concerned with promoting art and literature and papal influence than he was of being aware of spiritual weakness in the church, and so failed to recognize the rise of the Protestant Reformation. So this is the Pope at the time of Martin Luther. So we'll talk more about him when we talk about the Reformation. So in conclusion, what can we say about the Renaissance popes? I think what we have to remember is that this isn't the papacy bottoming out. The papacy bottoming out is when you get to the point where you have three people who are all claiming to be pope. No one knows who the pope is. The achievement of the Renaissance popes is to restore their authority, to restore their independence. The weakness of the Renaissance popes is that in doing this, they make themselves much more into political leaders, and their spiritual authority is damaged as a result.